Welcome to Breaking Down Patriarchy. I'm Amy McPhie Allebest. On one of our very first episodes of Breaking Down Patriarchy, I shared the following quote from Gerda Lerner's The Creation of Patriarchy. Quote, "Women are and have been central, not marginal, to the making of society and to the building of civilization. But until the most recent past, historians have been men, and what they have recorded is what men have done and experienced and found significant. They have called this history and claimed universality for it. What women have done and experienced has been left unrecorded, neglected, and ignored in interpretation. Thus, the record of the human race is only a partial record in that it omits half of humankind, and it is distorted in that it tells the story from the viewpoint of the male half of humanity only." I thought of this quote when I read Sharon McMahon's new book, The Small and the Mighty. McMahon opens her book by saying that most histories have celebrated, quote, "the men with the best military strategy, the people with the most ships, those with vast fortunes and political power," end quote. But she says that it is the people outside the dominant caste, those whose impact has been missed by people who either don't know where to look or have intentionally decided not to. It is their stories that she has come to find the most interesting. The Small and the Mighty brings so many important and fascinating stories to life. And to talk about them today, I am thrilled to welcome author, teacher, and historian Sharon McMahon. Welcome, Sharon.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
In case you've been living under a rock, listeners, for the past few years, Sharon McMahon is the #1 bestselling author of The Small and the Mighty, 12 Unsung Americans Who Changed the Course of History from the Founding to the Civil Rights Movement. She is the host of the incredibly successful and fabulous podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting, and she's a thought leader with an educational, inspiring Instagram account at Sharon Says So. She's known as America's government teacher, and she leads what are affectionately referred to as governerds all across the country. I count myself as one of those governerds. And I also highly recommend subscribing to Sharon's Substack called The Preamble. And Sharon, I just have to say, I love the preamble. I'm particularly really just eating up your profiles of the current Supreme Court justices. Those are
Oh, thank
so
you.
they're so fascinating, and it's so important. I forward them to my family and my friends, and it's just a huge fan of your work, and I'm so
Thank
thrilled to have you
you.
here.
That's
Yeah.
so nice. Thanks for reading. I appreciate that. And those profiles are I think really interesting. They take a long time to put together, but I think that we these are things that most people don't know and we need to know about our justices.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
And I can tell they take a long time to put together. I'm a writer myself, and I just marvel at how prolific you are in just churning out really incredible content. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. I
thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start out by having you introduce us a little bit to your personal background. I'd love to know just kind of who you are and what brought you to the work that you do today.
My background is in education. I've been a longtime classroom teacher. And, before that, I became interested in history and government just because of a newspaper route that I had as a child, where I read the newspaper every day while I walked my 3-mile route. And then I also had, unfettered access to the library, which was near my home. And then I later would take the bus down to the big main branch library. And I spent so much time reading and just being able to follow whatever the whim of the day was, learning new things. So that's really the genesis of how I got to know a lot of the things that I know. It started early, and then I became a
Mhm.
classroom teacher. And as a teacher, you will learn to anticipate what you're going to get asked. Like like they're not going to know about this thing.
Mhm.
Or period 1 asks a question and the other period 4 is going to have the same question. So all of that informs the work I do today. And, it's a different thing teaching adults on the internet, but in some ways it's also the same. In
Yeah.
some ways it's not that different. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about the subjects of your book. I loved your book so, so very much, and I'd love to just spend a long time digging into that.
Mm.
One question I have for you first, again, as a historian myself and as a writer, I was curious how you found these small and mighty figures. And I'm also guessing that you found even more who didn't make it into the book. And that was
Mhm.
probably heartbreaking to have to make
Mhm.
some cuts. So I'm curious how you found people and how you chose who to feature in the end.
Mm. Yeah, they were all found in a variety of different ways. Some of them, their name I just encountered in an old newspaper while I was researching a different topic. Or some of them, I kept seeing their names referenced in relationship to other things. And I became curious, like, why does this person's name keep coming up? And it's true, I know this is true of many historians, that they often will just follow their own curiosity down a rabbit hole to see where it leads. And sometimes it leads somewhere really, really cool where you have these sort of brain tingle moments where you're like, oh, I did not know that. And that is so exciting to know.
Hmm.
Many academics, many teachers will tell you the same thing that there's a unique pleasure in learning something you did not know before. It's almost like you just can't wait to tell someone how exciting this thing is.
Yep.
Like, did you know about this? And that one of the great pleasures is finding an audience that is excited to know the thing that you want to tell them.
Yep.
It's kind of the worst when you're so excited to share it, and then your partner or, whoever, your mom is like, "That's nice. That's nice," and they are so unenthusiastic. So
Mhm.
it's a singular joy to be able to discover some of these stories and then to be able to share them with an audience that is also excited about them. So there
Mm.
isn't one pipeline of how I located all of these people, but most of them, I was just following my own curiosity down a rabbit hole and stumbled upon some really interesting stories.
They are really interesting stories.
Mhm.
So I'd love to spend some time with some of these people. And like I talked about in the intro, you introduced your book with this beautiful story about the Northern Lights and your realization that there are these incredible stories, and you make the analogy, it's a metaphor, but these histories that are there, but we just don't know about them. And so for
Mhm.
you to bring these really inspiring stories to light, I'm just excited to share a few of them. And then if you haven't bought the book yet, go buy it right now, everyone who's
Mhm.
listening. But I'd love to start with Clara Brown. I
Mhm.
have to say, I'm from Colorado, and
Mm. Mhm.
I loved all of our history units all through my elementary school. I know I have never heard of Clara Brown before, and
Mm.
I was so sad that we didn't learn about her in our state history, and so grateful that I know about her now. So, can you tell us
Mhm.
about
I love
Clara?
that. Yeah, Clara Brown was an enslaved woman who was born enslaved, and she unfortunately watched her children and spouse get sold off to different owners, and she herself was sold off to someone else. And she sort of vows that she will, someday she hopes they will meet again. And it's really just the fondest wish of her heart that she will find her children again one day. And throughout the course of her life, Clara is sold to another owner and then she is emancipated. She is set free when her owner dies. And she is able to seek a job for pay. And being able to seek a job for pay as a free woman is something in her 50s she's never had the opportunity to do before. And it takes her across the country from where she had been enslaved in Kentucky to Kansas, to Missouri, and finally to Colorado. She hears about opportunities in Colorado that really just fascinate her, and she hooks up with this man who, I should say, she partners with a man who is a wagon train master, like a well known person who leads groups of people across what was referred to at the time as this sort of American desert. We could refer to it now as, the Great Plains. And she walks hundreds of miles to what will become the state of Colorado and becomes a wealthy woman through the fruit of her own labors. I say in the book that if there was, a picture that needed to go next to the phrase self-made in the dictionary, that Clara Brown should be next to it. She truly comes from absolutely nothing. And she was enslaved. She had not one possession to her name, and she becomes wealthy through her own hard work. And she begins to invest in all kinds of interesting things, properties, mining claims, etc. And one of the things that I think is most interesting about Clara is that, of course, she changes the course of Colorado history. She becomes friends with the governor, she becomes friends with the mayor. The governor sends her on these sort of missions on behalf of Colorado. She becomes an official pioneer of the state of Colorado. But one of the things that I think is most interesting about her is that she was really, when she became well off, she began investing in Colorado's infrastructure. And infrastructure at the time, we think of it as, today of like fiber optic cables and bridges. And at the time, infrastructure was what was holding your communities together. And often those were
Mm,
things like houses of worship and schools. That was the
mm,
infrastructure that kept communities moving forward. Those communal bonds that were formed. Americans, humans are not meant to live in isolation.
yeah.
Humans have evolved to live in communities. And Clara invests in churches and schools that she has no hope of attending. She's no
Mm,
intention of attending. She's no intention of becoming Catholic. She's a Protestant. She has no intention of going to the Methodist church or the Presbyterian church. She belongs to a different church. And yet it is her money that funds many of these church buildings so that other people can have important community too. And some of these churches actually still exist. They're on the National Register of Historic Places. You can go even online and look up some of the churches that Clara Brown contributed to. There's a beautiful church in Central City, Colorado,
hmm.
that Clara contributed half the amount of money to its construction. It took years to build. It's a beautiful stone church, has all kinds of really
Wow.
cool paintings on the inside. And they sent away for a pipe organ, and the pipe organ has really cool paintings on each of the pipes. And again, Clara does not go to this church. And it really just strikes me like, who is contributing to churches they do not belong to? I don't know
Yeah.
anybody that does that
No,
today, right?
no.
You if you go to a house of worship, you give to your own house of worship. You don't give money to somebody else's church, let alone pay for half the construction of a church building. It takes like 6 years to build.
Yeah.
But her belief was that everyone should be free. And that meant free to worship in the way that you saw fit and the infrastructure needed to worship in the way you saw fit. And I will save some of the story for, all of the ways in which Clara changes the face of Colorado. But suffice it to say that her contributions were so renowned even during her lifetime that she developed such a unique and large reputation that people were writing about her in East Coast newspapers. People were writing about
Mm,
her by her nickname, which became Angel of the Rockies.
mhm,
And what a legacy to be known for. What a
mm.
legacy to have spread far and wide. Um, that she did in many ways what Americans today are wouldn't even consider doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a really, really interesting twist to her story that I'll let the reader read about. But those are just a few things that I really love about her. She was illiterate throughout her life, and it was illegal to teach enslaved people how to read in many places, and so she never has the opportunity to learn how to read. So many of her stories were recorded. That where she told somebody else the story, or
Mm,
reporters came along and interviewed her. Um, and she's one of the people that I really would love to have been able to meet, in part because we don't have her first person narratives in the same way that we would somebody else. Some of the other
mhm.
people in the book have. We have many first person narratives of, but I'd love to be able to meet her someday.
Yeah, me too. Well, like I said, I'm so grateful to know about her. So next time I'm in Colorado, I'll go to Central City. I'll go to
Yes.
that church. And you
Yeah.
said there's a stained glass portrait of her in the Supreme Court
Yes. Yes, there is.
chambers in Denver.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
I can't wait to do that, and I'm so grateful to have her, like, introduced into my life, and I do wanna say too, I mean, our podcast is Breaking Down Patriarchy, right? So we're always looking at systemic,
Yeah.
issues and, like, what are the systems that were put in place hundreds or thousands of years before we lived, and we work within these systems, and I loved how in Clara's story and actually all of these people,
Mhm.
you really bring to the fore those systems, those unjust systems of sexism and racism that she encountered, where there's this one passage where it talks about how she had to pay when she was like paying for like a wagon train, she had to pay double the price that a white man would have paid.
That's right.
And just like these egregious injustices that she encountered, and just her resilience and her strength in overcoming them was just incredibly inspiring to me.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
I
totally. And
loved it.
she doesn't even she would not have had the tools to say, um, "Here's how I will fight against the patriarchy.
No.
Here's how I will change the systemic
Yeah.
issues." That would
Yep.
not have been something that a tool she would have had the ability to reach for. And yet she did what so many of our forebears have done when they have enacted major changes, which is the next needed thing.
Yeah.
And she kept putting
That's
one
right.
foot in front of the other. And it can be very easy to feel like the problems are too big. They're
Yep.
monumental. These are thousands of these systems of patriarchy, of racism, of misogyny are many, many, probably millennia old.
Yep.
That's probably not even exaggerating it.
It's
And
not. Yeah.
it seems like, how would I fix a 5,000-year-old problem? You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, how would I personally fix that? But most of the stories in this book show how a single individual absolutely can impact the course of history. And Claire is just a really, really beautiful example of that.
Yeah. She sure is.
Mhm, mm.
Okay, let's move on to another one. Catherine Lee Bates. I did know her name, and I thought she wrote a really famous song, but I don't remember which one. And then I learned all about it. But I would
Mhm,
love you to talk about Catherine Lee Bates. And specifically, I have to say, I got choked up when I read what she wrote. I think in a journal, she said, I would study and study and study and know and know and
mhm,
know. She just had this yearning for
mhm,
knowledge. So,
mm.
can you tell us all about Katie? I think she went by Katie,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
she goes by Katie. Katie is her mother's youngest child. She's born on the coast of Massachusetts, and her father was a Congregationalist minister, and he died shortly after she was born, leaving her mom a single mother. And there's a few different people in this book who are single mothers, and single motherhood has always been one of the most difficult things difficult paths to journey. It's still very, very challenging to be a single mother, but there was a big social stigma associated with being a single mom in the past. And it was quite difficult to support your children because of these sexist systems that closed women out from a huge variety of educational opportunities and a huge variety of professional opportunities. Women had to piecemeal together. I'll do some sewing, I'll do some gardening, I'll take in somebody's laundry. And you see that over and over. There's a very small a prescripted set of acceptable professions that women are allowed to pursue. And Katie's mother encounters that system. And she even describes in a letter, Katie's mom does, a letter to a friend, how profoundly exhausted she is. And it strikes me that her mom is not just profoundly physically exhausted trying to care for all of her children, but she has to be profoundly emotionally exhausted trying to
Mhm.
make a way for her children. And she, of course, has to lean on her older children to help make ends meet. And her son picks up some of the slack. Well, Katie is her youngest child. And often, youngest children, the older siblings feel like the youngest kid gets away with everything, and like, why does she get to go to that thing when she's 15? I had to wait till I was
Yep.
18. Like, if you're an older sibling, you know what I'm talking about. I'm an older sibling. Like, why does
Yep.
the youngest kid get to do everything? My older kids say that about my youngest kids, and I
Mine
even
too.
say this in the book that um mom is tired By the time the youngest child comes around, mama is tired,
Yep.
and she can't care about everything equally the way she did with the same hypervigilance she did when her older children were older. So Katie kind of gets away with stuff that her older siblings can't, like she's spends her childhood sort of like writing in her little journals in underneath the lilac tree, and her older siblings are like, we're out here trapping muskrats, okay, to like keep the
Uh-huh.
family afloat, and you're like writing and picking flowers and
Ah,
swinging in the swings. but
mhm.
but Katie, even as a child, observes the truth of the world. And her observation, even as a child, is that men can do whatever they want and women are supposed to do sewing and domestic labor. And that is what women are good for. And even throughout her entire life, she rails against the needle, as she calls
Mhm.
it. Like, why should women have to do sewing? And even women who have professions, she says, and she does
Yep.
later go on to have a profession, they're still supposed to sew, while men who become professionals don't have any domestic labor to do.
Yep. Yep.
And she writes in one of her journals at the time, her fascination with the world. And she's even saying, she says things like, how she's writing a letter to sort of like, Mr. Sun, how do you glow so brightly? What are you made of? She's sort of
Mhm.
hypothesizing about the world. And she says, as you mentioned, her fondest wish is that she could go to school as much as she wanted. And she would learn and learn and learn and know and know and know. And she knows that that is not the normal route that a,
Yeah.
a woman is allowed to take. And through a series of sort of fortunate events, she does become an academic. She's allowed to go to Wellesley at the time. At the time Wellesley was being formed, she later becomes a faculty member there, and she does devote herself to knowing and knowing and knowing. But her ultimate contribution to history is not in the things that she knew. It's in the things that she wrote,
Mm.
and the things that she wrote changed the hearts and minds of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Americans in ways that she could have never predicted. But had she not had the opportunity to know all of the things that she did, had she not had the opportunity to travel, which was one of her favorite hobbies, she would not have been able to write a poem that all of us know, that's now set to music. But that poem is America the Beautiful. And when you hear about, um, you think about the lyrics of America the Beautiful, it's just she's describing in each verse, she's describing something beautiful about the country that she has personally experienced, like the amber waves of grain, etc., purple mountains majesty. Um, and she then describes some sort of like, um, problem or aspirational hope that, so of a way that we can overcome it. And then she's describing what America at her best will be in each verse. And each verse sort of follows the same formula, but it does so in such a stirring way that there's almost nobody who would listen to that song and feel nothing.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
even there was a huge movement to make America the Beautiful the national anthem, and
Hmm.
that movement has never really died,
Hmm.
honestly. Um, our current national anthem is very, I there's a lot of great things about it, and it's very sentimental to people now, but our current national anthem is really hard to sing.
That's true.
Very hard to sing.
For one
This
thing, yeah.
for Yes, it's also very militaristic.
Yes, it's so
Um,
war-centered, yeah.
yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
Um, and America the Beautiful is about, in the words of Jesse Norman, it's about this land and the
Mhm.
people of this land and the beauty that is our brotherhood, um, in a way that like the current national anthem is not.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, count
Yeah.
my vote for America the Beautiful. I didn't
I
know that was a
know.
movement, but, like,
Yeah.
sign me up. I would
Yes,
love that.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
They really
Mm,
lobbied hard. The National Hymn Society, which is, a religious organization,
mhm.
lobbied hard for the president to make America the Beautiful the national anthem. The Star Spangled Banner has only been the official national anthem since the 1930s.
Mhm. I remember
Uh,
you saying that,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
I was shocked. I had no idea.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Can I ask you another I wanna just bring out one more detail from Katie's story, and that is when she got the teaching job at Wellesley. She
Mhm.
wrote to a friend, quote, "I am dreading next year horribly. I am a regular coward, and I would like to take my heels and run for it."
Mm, mhm,
And I loved that so much. It was so relatable, and I'm so grateful that you put that little morsel in there for
mm,
all your readers, because I think all of us feel that way, and I thought maybe even you, Sharon, in front of, all in these giant book tours and all of the publicity that you're doing. I wonder if even sometimes you feel like, I don't know if I want to do this and feel
mhm.
scared. And then if that's true, how do you overcome your fear so that you can do the work that you were born to do?
Mm, mm. I love that quote from her. It's not from her, not because I want her to feel afraid, but because, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
it's so relatable. We tend to
Yep.
think about, great Americans as being, like they ride on the back of a bald eagle and they have a sword and they're, like they are fearless in their pursuit of greatness.
Yep.
That's how we tend to view great Americans. They marched into battle and, that statement shows, like, no, I, in fact, was terrified,
Yep.
and I just kept doing the next needed thing,
Yeah.
and I didn't wanna do it. I mean, I think most of us have, experienced what will sometimes refer to as, like, the anticipatory dread of doing something we really don't wanna do or we think is gonna be terrifying, and we
Mhm.
think about it and, like, the dread of having that anticipatory anxiety of, like, "Oh, no. I don't wanna do that public speaking next week. I do not wanna go on the I wanna fly on an airplane," whatever it is. Most of us have
Mm.
experienced that. I absolutely have many times. I used to be terrified to fly on planes, first of all, and I would spend weeks and weeks and weeks, like,
Mm.
obsessing about this, "Oh, no, I'm just gonna be so scary. It's gonna be so terrible. What if there's turbulence?" Well, I'm happy to
Mhm.
report that I have since gotten over my fear of flying, but it used to be absolutely terrible. Before
Oh,
embarking
wow.
on this giant 6-week book tour where, I'm in 15 cities in front of huge audiences, thousands of people in each city, by and large, um, I did have, anticipatory anxiety. Not that I was afraid of talking to an audience because I knew the audience was gonna be friendly and they were
Mhm.
all excited to see me and, I was excited to see them. But, thinking about being away from home for 6 weeks, I'm naturally kind of a homebody and, like,
Mm.
I have to be on all these planes and all these airports, it's gonna be so stressful and, I just don't know if I should do it and blah, blah, blah. Like, I absolutely, um was concerned about whether or not I would even be able to pull it off.
Yeah.
Um, and I will say, of course, as it's almost always true, that the anticipatory anxiety is worse than the
Yeah.
actual doing. Like once
Yeah.
you're actually doing it, it's fun or fine. And that's
Yeah.
absolutely how I felt. I'm so glad I did it. It was a once in a lifetime experience. I had so much fun, but I absolutely was like, "Oh, no. What have I gotten myself in for?" Shortly before leaving. I absolutely did. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, and I just hope that listeners take that away from that passage and from what you just shared that,
Mm.
and I mean, this is something that I talk about with my kids sometimes too, is like when to listen to your voice and when
Yeah,
not to. Like, when to listen
yeah.
to your mind and when not to, but there are these things like, this was her taking a job at Wellesley and she was so passionate about education, and you, of course,
Mhm.
like, Re in order to reach our potential, there are times that our brains are gonna be screaming like, "No, no, no,
Yeah,
it's too scary."
yeah,
And just knowing that
totally.
everybody feels that way and to take that next brave step in order to, again, to do what we were born to do and make the contribution that we're here to make. So, Again, thanks
Yeah.
for including that. So, so
Yeah.
helpful. Okay, the next figure that I would love you to talk about, the next example of the small and the mighty doing amazing things, is Rebecca Brown Mitchell. And again, this was a woman I had never heard of.
Mhm.
And I've lived in the Western United States my whole life. I have family in Idaho. Never heard of her. So
Mhm.
grateful I know about her now. So, can you introduce us to Rebecca?
Yeah, she is just a fantastic example of what breaking down the patriarchy means. She truly is, because even in the 19th century, when she lived, when her husband, her first husband, dies, she is imprisoned in what she calls the iron cage of the law, where the patriarchal laws were such that women were not allowed to inherit their own familial property. They were called coverture laws.
Yep.
Women needed to be covered by some kind of male relative, whether it's a brother, a dad, a husband. And so
Mhm.
when her husband dies, she is only allowed legally to inherit two things: the family hymnal and the family Bible. She has no legal right to her own clothing, to
Mhm.
the dishes that they got as a wedding gift, to her children's belongings. And even at the time, she is like, this is bananas. If she had been that kind of woman, she would have been like, this is BS.
Mhm.
Like, this is a BS rule. And
Yep.
she wants to make something of herself. She longs to do something more than just like the sewing and the, no shade to sewing. I love needle crafts, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be
Yes.
obligated to only have that as my job.
Yep.
So she tries to find a college that will accept her. And over, she's told no as a single woman. She eventually does get remarried to her husband's brother, and then their marriage dissolves. And so now she has not just, oh, you're a widow, but it's unclear if they just separated or if they legally divorced. There aren't any records of it. But nevertheless, now she's like a widow plus a divorcee, or the societal equivalent of whatever that looks like in people's minds. And over, these colleges tell her, no, you can't be admitted. And she's applying to religious colleges. She wants to become like a missionary, and none of the religious organizations will accept her. Eventually, she persists, and eventually one of them sort of relents and lets her, do some sort of like correspondence type work. And she decides, when her children are grown and her youngest child is a teenager, that she is going to head west. This is a theme in the book, is that many women sort of revolted against this very fully formed patriarchal society of the eastern part of the United States, and sought refuge in the American West, where things were different. The women
Mhm.
of the West could vote long before women of the East. You
Mhm.
could vote in Utah way before you could vote in Massachusetts as a woman. And so that's one of the things I talk about in the book too. Like, why why women of the West? What was the West doing that gave women rights that women of the East didn't have? She gets on a train with her teenage daughter and runs out of money in Eagle Rock, Idaho, what later becomes Idaho Falls. And this is one of the things that I love about her throughout the rest of her life. First of all, she is in her 40s and 50s when she's embarking on this journey. She is not some hot 21-year-old. She is not like in the what we would call today the prime of her life.
Yep.
She is, if you look at pictures of her, she is dressed in head to toe ruffly black taffeta. Like the very old school, like my husband died, I'm wearing all black for the rest of my life type situation.
Yep.
Um, you would not look at her. She looks like an older woman wearing just like of copious amounts of floofy black taffeta fabric.
Mhm.
Um, and you know that everything that she tries to do, she's starting schools, she's starting churches, she's starting suffrage movements, she's working to gain women the right to vote. She becomes a very well renowned public speaker. She's traveling by train and by wagon throughout, all of the mountain passes into Montana and into Utah and all of these very, very rural cold places where travel is difficult so that she can be a speaker in all of these different events. You know that tongues were wagging. People were like, "Who does she think she is?"
Mm.
She's referred to in newspapers as a tiny tornado. That shows that other people observed the type of energy, the vigor with which she pursues suffrage. And she ultimately is
Mhm.
one of the women behind the passage of the amendment in the state of Idaho that allows women the right to vote. And she even gives these exhortations, like when people are like, "Why Idaho?" It's not like Idaho was
Mhm.
a bastion of progressivism, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
how Idaho was or is today.
Or
But
is.
her,
Yeah.
or yeah, is today. She even said, "Why not do the unheard of thing? Let Idaho be among the first." And I love this phrase, "Why not do the unheard of thing?" And she goes on to do something that she's the first woman in the world to do, and becomes famous in her lifetime for being the first woman in the world to do this thing. But that phrase, "Why not do the unheard of thing?" was something that, like, the men of Idaho had really not even considered. They were, wanting to maintain the status quo. And here
Yep.
women are pressing them to do the unheard of thing. Let Idaho be among the first. And it is their persistent, concerted efforts that change things not just for themselves. They knew that gaining the right to vote was not so much about themselves. Rebecca is like 60 something years old at this point. This is for the women of the future. And their labors were for all of us. They were not just,
Mm.
it was not about like, give me $1 million so I can buy my feather hats. You know what I mean? These labors are on behalf of descendants they did not even know yet. And
Mhm.
to me, that is such an encouraging thing to think about. There's another character in the book, Inez Milholland, who, when Inez dies, and Inez does not accomplish some of her goals, they say about her after her death that no work for liberty is ever lost, that it becomes part of the fabric of the nation. And I think that's such an encouraging thing to think about when we are working to change systems, when we're working to change, deeply entrenched ideas that are thousands of years old, that no work for liberty is ever lost. Even if you don't pick up the ball and carry it across the finish line yourself, that it changes the fabric of the country, it changes who we are as a people. And it's just something that I find valuable to sort of hang on to. That even if I don't see an achievement in my lifetime, that does not mean that my labors were in vain. And even though Rebecca does see, um, she does see, Idaho women gain the right to vote. That doesn't mean that she achieved everything that she wanted to. It doesn't mean that tongues didn't wag behind her back. It doesn't mean that she didn't feel the fear and do it anyway. And it occurs to me that so many of us are not necessarily afraid to fail. We're afraid to let other people watch us fail. And that's what
Yes.
keeps us stuck. It's not that we might not achieve our objective, because we fail to do things all the time. We fail to work out the number of times we say we're going to. We fail to eat the right number of servings of vegetables. Like, we actually fail at things all the time.
Mhm.
It's other people watching us fail that we're afraid of.
Mhm.
And the people who go on to be great Americans that history regards with kindness, that history says these are people worth remembering. They are not the critics, they're the doers. And they're
Mhm.
the people who allowed other people to watch them try and fail and try again and to keep doing the next needed thing.
Beautiful. This reminds me, if I can share this really quickly, of a conversation that I had yesterday with a friend of mine, a woman of color. And we were talking about doing anti-racist work, and particularly white women. And we're recording this pretty closely after the election in 2024. And there's a lot being talked about Black women just being exhausted and needing to rest, and about white women needing to step up and do more. And talking with this friend of mine yesterday, she said, yeah, sometimes I said, I think that sometimes white women are scared of doing it wrong, right? And they're scared. And she said, yeah, like scared of, people calling them out and canceling them, and they're scared of being shamed publicly. And I said, yeah, yes, for sure, yes. And also really scared of causing additional harm, like scared of hurting people, and they're just scared of making those mistakes. And she said, yeah, I think that maybe what a lot of white women need is maybe just the resilience to be able to have the courage to make mistakes and keep going. And that they might have to, just exactly to your point, Sharon, and how you wrote it in the book, the courage to let people see you make mistakes and fail. And that's really scary. And especially when the stakes are really high. But
Mhm.
that was what was on my mind, is like it's one thing to like make a mistake, like not show up at the right time for a meeting that you have scheduled, like
Mhm.
I did.
Mhm.
It's another thing to make a mistake and have someone and do actual harm, like harm comes from it, and to be able to pick yourself up and say, I'm sorry, I learned, and just have that humility, and then just the courage and resilience to be like, and I'm going to try again. I'm not going to give up.
Mhm.
That's what came to my mind when I was hearing that.
Mhm, mm.
So,
Yeah, that make I hear you. I hear you, and I know where you're coming from and where your friend was coming from. When you're talking about people being afraid to cause harm, afraid of doing it wrong, and we let that fear, whether it
mhm,
is real or whether it is imagined. And I think sometimes, yes, there is a real people have real fears about like, well, I did it before and I hurt somebody, and so they're sort of once bitten, twice shy. But I do think
mm,
sometimes people use that as an excuse. They use it as an
mm,
excuse to keep them from actually trying. They use it as a cover for, well, I don't want to hurt anybody, so I'm not quite sure what to do. The answer is just do the next needed thing. That's
mhm,
what our forebears have done. Sometimes maybe they made a mistake and realized, like, well, this was not actually helpful. And you know what? That actually is tremendously useful information. If you try something and it doesn't go well, then you know, okay, that was not the right thing to do. And you don't have to waste your time doing that again in the future.
mhm,
I've heard this advice given from, sort of the titans of industry, people who have made billions of dollars, who've been wildly successful at, whatever it is, whatever their venture is. People have said, what's the secret to your success? And over and over, people have given some variation of the phrase, fail faster.
mm,
Try
mhm,
again and get it wrong faster, because failure is incredibly instructive. Failure is incredibly valuable information that you can actually not gain by thinking, by,
mhm.
just like ruminating on it, by reading up
True.
on it. You can only gain that super valuable information from trying and failing at something. Fail
Mhm.
faster is a really useful way to think of it.
I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, and I'll throw in here too another teaser that you mentioned Ines Milholland, and we won't have time to go into her story, but my listeners and my viewers on YouTube will know about Ines Milholland as the woman who was riding the white horse leading the women's parade, the Great Women's March for women's suffrage. So you know who she is already. And I learned so much about this woman and was so inspired by her. So again, just another
Mm,
plug to get the book and read all about her. She's just
mm,
fantastic.
mhm,
But maybe the last women that I'll ask you about, Sharon, are you featured Claudette Colvin and Septima Clark in your book, and I'm so grateful. These are heroes of mine. I studied women in the civil rights movement during my master's degree and wrote my master's thesis on women in SNCC. And
mm,
I knew about these women, and again was just thrilled to get to know them better and
mhm,
learn details I'd never heard before. And I'm going to read just this one little passage that you wrote in the chapter on Septima Clark. You quote her as saying, "You never know when a person's going to leap forward or change around completely. I've seen growth like most people don't think possible. I can even work with my enemies because I know from experience that they might have a change of heart any minute." And that
Mm.
makes me emotional because I think of times that I have had a change of heart, that I've learned things, and I've been so grateful for people's patience with me when I make mistakes, and just the relentless faith in people that they could have a change of heart any minute. I just love that from Septima. And I know that's one of the cornerstones of your work, Sharon.
Mhm.
So could you talk about that a little bit? Talk about Septima and about that quote, especially in the context of this moment in history and how relevant it
Yeah.
is.
It really is, isn't it? I love Septima. She's also like a personal hero of mine. She was born in 1898 and had a set of life circumstances that nobody would ever emulate or wish to emulate. She gets married, she has a baby, her baby dies of a birth defect. She has another baby and discovers that her husband has a secret second life. He is married to somebody else, has kids with this other woman, and then shortly after discovering this, her husband dies, leaving her what? A single mom, right? And she becomes despondent. She, contemplates suicide and is rescued sort of at the last moment from committing suicide. She goes on to become a teacher because her mom did not want her to become a domestic servant. Her mom knew for firsthand how easy it was for domestics, as they were called, to be taken advantage of by their employers, that it made them very vulnerable. She wants her daughter to get an education. So Septima becomes a teacher at a time when she was not allowed to teach in Charleston public schools, where she grew up. Even as a Black teacher, she was not allowed to teach in Black schools. They did not hire Black teachers in Charleston. And she moves to one of the South Carolina barrier islands, and John's Island, and she begins teaching at a school for Black children there. That is, the conditions that she is teaching in are truly horrific. Um, the amount of illness and contagious illness and malnutrition and issues that this community on John's Island faced were formidable. And the school that she teaches in does not have any windows, glass in the windows. It only has shutters, and it does not have electricity, and the children do not have any books. And the only choices were to keep the shutters closed to keep the bugs out. And this is, again, South Carolina, plenty of bugs, or to leave them open and get eaten alive by bugs. And again, bugs spread contagious illness. So the children were literally learning in the dark with no books. And the sign on the front of the school said Promise Land School. And it was anything but the promised land. It really was. It was anything but. And there's no chance that Septima looked around her life, looked around at the school she was teaching, and she was often forced to send her own child to live with her dead husband's parents because she did not have the financial resources or the physical resources to care for him. And so he would periodically have to go stay with them. There's no chance that she thought, I'm really making such a societal difference here. Like, I'm really overturning systemic racism. I'm really impacting the civil rights of African Americans working here at Promised Land School. I can promise you that she did not think that. And yet, instead of throwing up her hands and feeling like nothing will ever change, which is that cynicism, that sense of nihilism or fatalism that so many Americans have today. She refused to engage in it. She refused to engage in this idea that nothing can ever change. And despite her external circumstances, despite the totality of her life, which includes being falsely arrested and accused of crimes she doesn't commit, which includes people actively trying to kill her, like they catch people on their way to firebomb her house. She feels like she has her life spared on multiple occasions. She's fired from her job. She's made a laughing stock of the community. Despite all of these circumstances, she never gives up hope that people and things can change. And in fact, she goes on to demonstrate that people and things can change. When she's fired from her job in Charleston Public Schools, that frees up her time to begin teaching adults. And her freed up time allows her to teach somebody, an adult woman by the name of Rosa Parks. And in many ways, Septima is the mother of the civil rights movement. It was Septima who was empowering people like Rosa Parks to do the work that she went on to do. And of course, you know this, having studied women in the civil rights movement, that Rosa was far more than just a lady on a bus, that she had a really significant impact on the civil rights movement beyond that day on a bus in December in Montgomery, Alabama. But Rosa would not be who she was had Septima not been there for her. Claudette Colvin would not be who she was without Rosa Parks. All the web of interconnectedness of these women, I think, is an important takeaway here, is that we do not know all of the ways in which our work will impact people of the future. And it echoes back to what I was saying earlier. 100 years earlier, in the case of Rebecca Brown Mitchell, 50 years earlier almost in the case of Inez Milholland, that no work for liberty is lost. And Septima goes on to say, as you quoted, that at the end of her life, she becomes a member of the Charleston School Board. People ask her what she's learned, and she says, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And dang it, if that is not a message that Americans need today, and I've mentioned this before, and so many people have told me, like, oh, I'm just not there. I'm not ready to work with my enemies, but I actually really hate my enemies. So why would I want to work with them? My enemies are the
Mhm.
worst, so I'm going to pass. Listen, Septima had real enemies.
Yeah.
She had people actually trying to kill her.
Yeah.
She grew up in the Jim Crow South. She was not equal throughout most of her lifetime. She did not have equal rights, and she was part of many lawsuits to gain more equal representation, more rights. Septima had real enemies, both personal and systemic. And her perspective was, I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And how are our enemies going to have a change of heart if we do not work with them? That is a very real question I would pose to Americans today. If your enemies only coexist with your other enemies, guess what? It's going to be a self-perpetuating cycle. They're just
Mhm.
gonna keep on being like, yeah, you are right. You're totally right. They're only going to hear echoes of their own opinions reverberating back to them. How will our enemies see the light if we refuse to share it with them? Whoever you define your enemy as, and I'm not talking about like warfare enemy. I'm talking about like maybe
Yeah.
somebody with whom you have a strong ideological difference. How will they see the light if you don't show them your candle? And that is just as relevant a message in 2024, in 2025, as it was in 1955, as it was in 1898, as it was in 1850, and for thousands of years before that.
Mm. Hear, hear. Well, I couldn't agree more. And Sharon, that I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our conversation. I feel so heartened and so galvanized to keep doing the next needed thing and to remember that no effort in the right direction is wasted. We
Mhm,
all inherit what we inherit, and we have no control over that, but we do have control over what we do,
mhm,
right? And what how we choose to use our precious time on earth. And again, I cannot recommend highly enough this book, The Small
mm,
and the Mighty. I know you'll find it just inspiring and again galvanizing because it helps us identify what is the work that I have to do. All of these amazing examples, they did what they were supposed to do or what
That's
they
right.
were born to do. What can I do now? So,
I love that.
Sharon, again, thank you. I'm such a big fan, and this was just a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us
It's
today.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.